They found her 45 years later, not alive, not whole, but found. And the man who took her? He'd been living less than 30 miles from where she disappeared, hidden in plain sight, growing old while a mother waited by a window that never stopped glowing. This is the story of 3 lives erased in a single morning, of a family that refused to forget, and of the moment when silence finally cracked open and spilled its secrets into the light. Montgomery, Alabama. 1979. A young mother and her 2 baby daughters leave home for a short trip across state lines. They never arrive. No crash, no call, no trace. Just a beige sedan that rolled into the heat of a summer day and vanished. Before we go any further, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city, your state, your country in the comments. Let's see how far this story reaches. Because what happened to Rebecca James could have happened anywhere, to anyone. Now let's go back to the morning it all began. It was June 14th, 1979, the kind of morning that felt like it would last forever. The sun hadn't fully cleared the pines yet, but the heat was already settling in thick and slow, the way it does in the deep south. The air smelled like honeysuckle and cut grass. Somewhere down the block, a screen door slammed. A dog barked twice, then went quiet. Inside a small apartment on the east side of Montgomery, the world was moving at the pace of a young mother with 2 babies and not enough sleep. Rebecca James stood at the kitchen counter, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a diaper bag slung over one shoulder. She was 23 years old, but some days she felt twice that. Single motherhood had a way of aging you in places people couldn't see. Her oldest daughter, Anna, toddled across the linoleum floor, barefoot, clutching a cracker in one chubby fist and a stuffed rabbit in the other. She was 14 months old, just starting to walk, just starting to say, "Mama," in that soft, uncertain way that made Rebecca's chest ache every time she heard it. On the couch, wrapped in a thin cotton blanket, baby Alyssa blinked up at the ceiling. 1 month old, still so new to the world that her eyes hadn't quite figured out how to focus. She made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a coo, and Rebecca crossed the room in 3 steps, scooping her up with the kind of practiced ease that only comes from doing it 100 times a day. "Shh, sweet girl," she whispered, rocking gently. "We're leaving soon, just a little longer." At the kitchen table, Teresa sat with her hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. She was Rebecca's mother, a woman who had raised 6 children in that same apartment, who had buried a husband too young, and who had learned long ago that worry was just another word for love. She watched her daughter move through the small space with quiet efficiency, and something tightened in her chest. "You sure about this?" Teresa asked, her voice careful. "That's a long drive with 2 babies." Rebecca didn't look up. She was folding a blanket, tucking it into the diaper bag alongside bottles and diapers and a change of clothes for each girl. "We'll be fine, Mom. It's just Georgia. I need to see Lisa. Clear my head a little." "Clear your head," Teresa repeated softly. She took a sip of the cold coffee and grimaced. "You've been looking tired lately, baby, more than usual." Rebecca finally turned, and for just a moment, her face softened. "I'm always tired, Mom. That's what this is." She gestured vaguely at the apartment, at the girls, at the life she was living. "But I'm okay, really." Teresa wanted to say more. Wanted to ask why now, why so sudden, why she hadn't mentioned this trip until last night. But she'd raised 6 kids. She knew when to push and when to let go. So instead, she stood and walked to the counter, pulling out a wicker basket. She filled it slowly, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a thermos of fresh coffee, a sleeve of crackers, 2 apples. She folded a soft blanket on top and set the basket by the door. "For the road," she said simply. Rebecca's eyes went glassy for just a second, then she blinked it away and smiled. "Thanks, Mama." By late morning, the car was packed. The beige sedan sat in the driveway, engine ticking in the heat. It was old, a '72 Dodge Dart, with rust spots along the wheel wells and a passenger door that stuck when it rained. But it ran. Most days, anyway. Rebecca buckled Anna into the back seat, double-checking the straps, making sure the stuffed rabbit was within reach. Then she placed Alyssa in the bassinet beside her, tucking the blanket around her tiny body. Teresa stood on the front step, arms crossed, watching. Rebecca climbed into the driver's seat and rolled down the window. "I'll call you when we get there," she said. "Probably late tonight." "You better," Teresa replied, trying to keep her voice light. "And drive safe. Don't rush. If you need to stop, stop." "I will. And if the car starts acting funny—" "Mom," Rebecca smiled, that same patient smile she'd been giving her mother since she was a teenager. "We'll be fine." Teresa nodded. She didn't trust herself to say anything else. Rebecca turned the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, then caught. She gave her mother one last look, one last smile, and then she pulled out of the driveway. Teresa stood there, watching the car roll down the street. She saw Anna's tiny hand pressed against the back window, fingers splayed wide. She lifted her own hand and waved. The car turned the corner, and then it was gone. Teresa stood there for a long time, even after the sound of the engine had faded. The street was quiet again. The heat pressed down. Somewhere, a lawnmower started up. She told herself it was fine, told herself Rebecca was a good driver, told herself she'd hear from her tonight. But as she walked back inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had just slipped through her fingers. The day passed the way summer days do in the South, slow and heavy, the kind of heat that makes you move like you're underwater. Teresa cleaned the apartment, washed the dishes, folded the laundry. She kept the radio on, low, just for the company. Every time a car passed outside, she glanced toward the window. By late afternoon, she started glancing at the clock. By evening, she was watching it. Rebecca had said she'd call when she got there. Late tonight, she'd said. But what did that mean? 9? 10? Midnight? Teresa made herself a sandwich she didn't eat. She sat at the kitchen table and tried to read the newspaper, but the words blurred together. She kept thinking about that hand pressed against the window, that last wave. 9 o'clock came and went. 10. 11. At midnight, Teresa picked up the phone and dialed the number Rebecca had left, her Lisa's number, the friend in Georgia. It rang 4 times, then a groggy voice answered. "Hello? Lisa, it's Teresa, Rebecca's mother." A pause. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Teresa. Is everything okay? I was just checking. Has Rebecca gotten there yet?" Another pause, longer this time. "Rebecca? No, ma'am. I haven't seen her. Was she supposed to come by today?" Teresa's stomach dropped. "She left this morning. She said she was coming to see you." I didn't know she was coming. We haven't talked in a couple weeks." The room tilted slightly. Teresa gripped the edge of the table. "She left at 11 this morning, with both girls. She said she'd be there by tonight." "Mrs. Teresa, I swear, I haven't heard from her. Maybe she stopped somewhere, or maybe she's running late." "Maybe," Teresa whispered, but she didn't believe it. She hung up and stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone, like it might ring on its own, like Rebecca might call any second and laugh and say she'd gotten turned around, that she'd stopped at a motel, that everything was fine, but the phone didn't ring. Teresa walked to the front door and turned on the porch light. It was something her late husband used to do whenever one of the kids was out late. "So, they can find their way home," he'd say. She left it on. At 2 in the morning, she was still awake, sitting in the living room with all the lights off except for that one bulb burning outside. She stared at the door, willing it to open. It didn't. By dawn, the worry had hardened into something sharper, something cold. "Teresa," called the police. The officer who answered sounded young, distracted. "And when did she leave, ma'am?" "Yesterday morning, around 11, and she was headed where?" "Georgia, to see a friend. But the friend says she never arrived." "Uh-huh. And how old is your daughter?" 23. A pause. "Ma'am, with all due respect, she's an adult. Sometimes people change their plans. Maybe she decided to go somewhere else. Maybe she needed some space." "She has 2 babies with her," Teresa said, her voice tight. 1 month old and 14 months. She wouldn't just disappear. "I understand, ma'am, but unless there's evidence of foul play, we can't really—" "She's missing," Teresa interrupted. "My daughter and my grandbabies are missing. I need you to help me find them." The officer sighed. "I'll file a report, but honestly, most of these cases resolve themselves in a day or 2. She'll probably turn up." Teresa hung up before she said something she'd regret. She grabbed her purse and her keys and walked out to her car. If the police weren't going to look, she would. She drove the route Rebecca would have taken east out of Montgomery, toward the Georgia line. She stopped at every gas station, every diner, every rest stop along the way. She showed Rebecca's photo to clerks and waitresses and truck drivers. Most of them shook their heads. A few squinted at the picture, trying to remember. One woman at a Texaco station paused. "Maybe," she said slowly. "I think I saw a young woman yesterday. She had a baby with her." Asked about the payphone. Teresa's heart jumped. "What time? Afternoon, maybe? I'm not sure. We get a lot of people through here." "Did she say where she was going?" The woman shook her head. "Sorry, hun, I don't remember." Teresa thanked her and kept driving. By the time she got home, it was nearly dark. She'd driven over 100 miles, talked to dozens of people, and she had nothing. She walked inside, exhausted, and turned on the television. She needed noise, needed distraction. The local news was on. She almost turned it off. Then she heard the anchor's voice. "Authorities are asking for the public's help in locating a missing Montgomery woman and her 2 young daughters." Teresa froze. A photo flashed on the screen. Rebecca, holding Anna and Alyssa, smiling. 23-year-old Rebecca James was last seen leaving her home yesterday morning. Family members say she was traveling to Georgia and has not been heard from since. Anyone with information is urged to contact Montgomery police. The photo lingered for a moment. Then it faded. A commercial came on, something about laundry detergent. Teresa stared at the screen, her hands trembling. That was it. 30 seconds. A photo. A plea. And then the world moved on. She looked around the apartment. The high chair still sat by the window. A baby bottle rested in the dish rack. The stuffed rabbit Anna had left behind lay on the couch. Everything was exactly as it had been yesterday morning, except Rebecca and the girls were gone. The days that followed blurred together. Teresa's son, Miguel, took time off work. He printed flyers, hundreds of them with Rebecca's photo and a phone number. He stapled them to telephone poles, taped them to storefront windows, handed them out at intersections. The family organized search parties. Friends and neighbors walked the back roads, calling Rebecca's name into the trees. They checked ditches and riverbanks and abandoned buildings. They found nothing. Tips started coming in. A woman at a truck stop thought she'd seen someone matching Rebecca's description. A man said he'd passed a beige sedan on Highway 80, and the driver looked tired, like she'd been on the road all night. But none of it led anywhere. The police opened an official investigation. Detectives interviewed Teresa, Miguel, Rebecca's friends. They asked questions that felt like accusations. Was she having financial trouble? Was there a boyfriend, an ex? Did she seem depressed? Teresa answered every question, her voice steady even as her hands shook. She loved her girls, she said over and over. She wouldn't leave them, she wouldn't leave us. But she could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe her. Weeks passed. The flyers curled in the rain. The tips slowed to a trickle. The detectives stopped calling as often. And then, one afternoon, Miguel came by the apartment. He sat at the kitchen table, his face drawn, and slid a piece of paper across to his mother. It was a police report. At the bottom, in neat clinical handwriting, were 3 words: presumed voluntary disappearance. Teresa read it twice, then she looked up at her son. "What does that mean?" Miguel's jaw tightened. "It means they think she left on purpose. That she's not missing, she just doesn't want to be found." "That's not true." "I know, Mama. They're giving up." Miguel didn't answer. He didn't have to. Teresa folded the paper carefully and set it aside. Then she stood, walked to the wall, and pinned up a map, Alabama and Georgia, side by side. She pulled out a box of red pushpins. "What are you doing?" Miguel asked. "Marking every place someone said they saw her," Teresa replied. "Every gas station, every diner, every road." "Mama, I'm not giving up," she said quietly. "I don't care what that paper says. I'm not giving up." Miguel watched her for a long moment. Then he stood and helped her pin the first marker. The months turned into years. The case went cold. The detectives moved on to other files. The media stopped covering it. The world forgot. But Teresa didn't. Every night, she kept the porch light on. Every birthday, Anna's, Alyssa's, she baked a cake and set it by the window, pink for Anna, white for Alyssa, just in case they found their way home. She never stopped believing. Because somewhere out there, beyond the highways and the back roads and the endless stretches of southern pine, there were 3 empty seats in a beige sedan. and a mother who refused to let them be forgotten. So here's what I need you to think about. If you were Teresa, how long would you wait? How many years would you keep that light burning before you let yourself believe they were really gone? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story is pulling you in, if you need to know what happens next, hit that subscribe button, because this is only the beginning. The truth is still out there, waiting in the dark. And in Act 2, we're going to find it. The light never went out. For 10 years, then 20, then 30. Every single night, that porch light burned a small, stubborn star in the Alabama darkness, refusing to believe that hope could die. But hope isn't free. It costs you. It takes pieces of you every day and never gives them back. And for Teresa, the cost was everything. Because while the world moved on, while neighbors stopped asking and detectives stopped calling, she stayed frozen in that moment in the space between the last wave and the silence that followed. But here's the thing about cold cases. They don't stay cold because there's nothing to find. They stay cold because no one's looking hard enough. And sometimes it takes decades for the right person to start digging. Welcome to Act 2. This is where the search begins, where false hope becomes a weapon, and where the question stops being, what happened to Rebecca James? And starts becoming, who made sure we'd never find out? The 1,980 seconds came and went like a slow, grey fog. Teresa aged in ways that had nothing to do with time. Her hair went silver, her hands grew thin, but her eyes stayed sharp, fixed on that map on the wall, the one covered in red pins, each one a rumor, a sighting, a ghost of a lead. Miguel kept searching too, but it was different for him. He had a wife now, kids, a job that demanded his attention. He couldn't live in the past the way his mother did, but he tried. Every few months, he'd take a weekend and drive. He'd retrace the route Rebecca was supposed to take, stopping at the same gas stations, showing the same photo to new faces who didn't remember and old faces who'd forgotten. "I'm looking for my sister," he'd say. "She disappeared in 1979, her and her 2 baby girls." Most people would shake their heads. Some would offer condolences. A few would say they'd keep an eye out, even though everyone knew they wouldn't. One man, a mechanic in a town called Phoenix City, right on the Alabama-Georgia line, stared at the photo for a long time. 1,979, you said? "Yeah, June." The man scratched his jaw. "I remember something from around then. Police came through asking about a car. Beige sedan, I think," said a woman, "and some kids were missing." Miguel's pulse quickened. "Did you see her?" "Nah, but I remember thinking it was strange. We don't get a lot of missing persons cases out here, mostly just folks passing through." "Did the police find anything?" The man shrugged. "Not that I heard, but you know how it is. If they did, they didn't tell us." Miguel thanked him and left. He added Phoenix City to the map when he got home. Another pin. Another dead end. But Teresa refused to see it that way. "It means she was there," she said, pointing at the map. "It means we're getting closer." Miguel didn't have the heart to tell her that closer didn't mean anything if there was nowhere to arrive. In 1987, something happened that made the family believe just for a moment that the waiting was over. A body was found. It was discovered by a pair of hunters in a wooded area about 40 miles east of Montgomery, not far from the route Rebecca would have taken. Female, approximate age, mid-20s. Remains were skeletal, partially buried, hidden beneath years of leaves and undergrowth. The police called Teresa on a Tuesday afternoon. She was in the kitchen when the phone rang. She almost didn't answer. She'd learned to dread phone calls. They were never good news. But she picked up. "Mrs. Teresa, this is Detective Holloway with the Montgomery Police Department." Her breath caught. "Yes? Ma'am, we've found some remains. We're not sure yet, but there's a possibility it could be your daughter." The room tilted. Teresa gripped the counter. "Where?" "About 40 miles east. We'll need to run tests. Dental records if you have them. It's going to take some time." "How long?" "A few weeks. Maybe more." Teresa closed her eyes. "Okay. I'm sorry, ma'am. I know this is hard. But we'll let you know as soon as we know anything." She hung up and stood there, staring at nothing. Miguel came over that night. They sat at the kitchen table, not speaking, just waiting. Waiting for the phone to ring again. Waiting for the world to confirm what they'd always feared. The next 3 weeks were the longest of Teresa's life. She couldn't eat, Couldn't sleep. Every time the phone rang, her heart stopped. Every time it wasn't the police, she felt something inside her crack a little more. She kept baking the birthday cakes, kept the porch light on. But now, it felt different, like she was saying goodbye. Finally, the call came. "Mrs. Teresa, this is Detective Holloway." "Yes." Her voice was barely a whisper. The dental records came back. "It's not her." Teresa didn't move, didn't breathe. "Ma'am? Did you hear me? It's not Rebecca. I heard you. I'm sorry for putting you through this, but we had to be sure." She hung up without saying goodbye. Miguel found her an hour later, sitting in the dark, staring at the wall. "Mama?" She didn't look at him. It wasn't her. "I know. The detective called me too." "It wasn't her," she said again, and this time her voice broke. "So where is she, Miguel? Where is my baby?" He didn't have an answer, and that was the worst part. Not the grief, not the fear, the not knowing. It happened again in 1995. Another body, another call, another 3 weeks of waiting, and again, it wasn't her. Each time, the hope surged sharp and brutal, and then crashed, leaving nothing but wreckage behind. How many times can a heart break before it stops beating altogether? Teresa was starting to find out. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Because stopping meant accepting, and accepting meant letting go, and she wasn't ready to let go. The world kept changing around her. The Soviet Union fell. The internet was born. Cell phones became common. DNA testing became standard. And slowly, quietly, cold cases started getting solved. In 1999, a detective named Raymond Cole was assigned to the cold case unit in Montgomery. He was in his early 50s, a veteran cop with a reputation for being thorough and stubborn, two qualities that made him very good at his job and very annoying to work with. He'd been a rookie in 1979. He remembered the Rebecca James case, remembered the flyers, remembered the mother who wouldn't stop calling. Now, 20 years later, he pulled the file. It was thin, too thin. A missing persons report, a few witness statements, some notes about possible sightings, and at the bottom, that damning phrase, "presumed voluntary disappearance." Cole read through it twice. Then he leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Something about it didn't sit right. A 2-3-year-old single mother doesn't just vanish with 2 infants. Not without a reason, not without leaving something behind. He started digging. He requested toll records from 1,979, most of them were long gone. He contacted the Georgia State Patrol, asking if there had been any accidents reported on the route that day. Nothing. He tracked down the original detectives who'd worked the case. One had died, the other was retired, living in Florida, and didn't remember much. "It was a long time ago," the man said over the phone. "We did what we could, but there was no evidence of foul play. No body, no witnesses. She just disappeared." "Did you ever consider that someone might have taken her?" Cole asked. A pause. "We considered everything, but without evidence, there's only so much you can do." Cole hung up, unsatisfied. He went back to the map. He studied the route. Montgomery to Georgia, Highway 80, most likely. Small towns, rural roads, plenty of places to disappear. And then he saw something. Between 1,978 and 1,982, there had been 3 other disappearances along that same stretch of highway, all women, all traveling alone or with small children, all unsolved. 3 other families, waiting by 3 other windows. Cole felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't random. This was a pattern. He called Teresa. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was older now, softer, but still steady. "Mrs. Teresa, this is Detective Raymond Cole with the Montgomery Police. I'm reopening your daughter's case." There was a long silence. Then, "Why now?" "Because I think someone took her," Cole said. "And I think they took others too." Another silence. "What do you need from me?" Teresa asked. "Everything you remember. Every detail. Every person she knew. Every place she went. I've told this story 100 times. I know. But I'm listening now." For the first time in 20 years, Teresa felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Cole worked the case for the next 5 years. He interviewed old witnesses, tracked down people who'd lived along the route in 1979. He cross-referenced the other disappearances, looking for connections. And slowly, a picture started to form. A man, a drifter, someone who moved from town to town, picking up work where he could, mechanic, handyman, truck driver, someone who knew the roads, someone who knew how to disappear. But every time Cole got close, the trail went cold. The man had used different names, paid in cash, left no records. It was like chasing smoke. In 2005, Cole retired, but he didn't close the file. He kept it on his desk at home, kept working it in the margins of his life. "I made a promise," he told his wife. "I'm going to keep it." Then, in 2018, everything changed. A new technology emerged, genetic genealogy, the same technique that had been used to catch the Golden State Killer. Cole reached out to a genealogist named Dr. Marissa Tran. He explained the case, explained the pattern, explained the decades of dead ends. "Do you have DNA?" she asked. "We have samples from unidentified remains found in the area. We've been holding on to them for years, hoping for a match. Send them to me." It took 6 months. 6 months of building family trees, tracing distant relatives, eliminating possibilities. And then, in the spring of 2019, Dr. Tran called Cole. "I have a name." Cole's hand tightened around the phone. "Who?" "His name is Leonard Pritchard, born 1948, lived in Alabama and Georgia in the late 72nds and early 82nds. Arrested multiple times for assault, battery, and intimidation. Did time in the 92nds for aggravated assault. Where is he now?" "Still alive, living in a trailer park outside Dothan, Alabama." Cole felt his pulse, hammering in his ears. "Are you sure?" "The DNA is a match to items recovered from a storage unit he rented in 1979. It's him." Cole closed his eyes. "Thank you." He hung up and sat in the silence for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called Teresa. "Mrs. Teresa, it's Detective Cole. Did you find her?" "Not yet, but I found him." Her breath hitched. "Who?" "The man who took her." There was a long, trembling silence. Then Teresa whispered, "Bring him in." "So here's what I need you to ask yourself. How does a man live for 40 years, knowing what he did? How does he sleep? How does he look at himself in the mirror? And more importantly, how many others are out there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally connect the dots? If this story is gripping you, if you need to see justice done, hit that like button and subscribe. Because in Act 3, we're going to watch that man answer for every single second of silence he forced on a family. The reckoning is coming. Justice plus 45 years equals what, exactly? Does it equal closure? Does it equal peace? Or does it just equal a different kind of waiting, one where you finally know the truth, but the truth doesn't give you back what you lost? Teresa was about to find out. Because in the spring of 2024, after nearly half a century of silence, the man who erased 3 lives was finally going to answer for it. But here's the thing about answers. Sometimes they hurt worse than the questions ever did. This is Act 3, the reckoning. The moment when everything that was hidden gets dragged into the light, and not all of it is easy to look at. It was April 9th, 2024, just after dawn, when the police arrived at the trailer park outside Dothan, Alabama. The place was quiet. A handful of rusted mobile homes sat in uneven rows, separated by patches of dirt and weeds. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The air smelled like motor oil and old rain. Detective Raymond Cole stood beside the lead officer, his jaw tight, his hands steady. He was 73 years old now, retired for nearly 2 decades, but he'd asked to be there for this. Needed to be there. The warrant had been issued 3 days earlier. 3 counts of murder, kidnapping, concealment of remains. The suspect's name was Leonard Pritchard. He was 76 years old, and he'd been living 30 miles from where Rebecca James disappeared. The officers moved in formation, surrounding the trailer. One of them knocked hard on the door. "Leonard Pritchard, Montgomery Police, open the door." Nothing. Another knock. Louder this time. "We have a warrant. Open up now." A long pause. Then the sound of shuffling inside, a lock turning. The door cracked open. The man who stood there was thin, stooped, with grey hair and a face carved by time and something darker. He looked at the officers with watery eyes, then at Cole. "What's this about?" His voice was rough, like gravel scraped across metal. "Leonard Pritchard, you're under arrest for the murders of Rebecca James, Anna James, and Alyssa James." For just a second, something flickered across his face. Not surprise, not fear. Recognition. He knew exactly why they were there. They cuffed him without resistance. As they led him to the patrol car, neighbors stepped out onto their porches, watching in silence. One woman held a hand over her mouth. An older man shook his head slowly. "He seemed so quiet," someone whispered. Cole stood in the driveway, watching as they loaded Pritchard into the back of the car. He thought about Teresa, about Miguel, about the 45 years they'd spent waiting for this moment, and he wondered if it would be enough. The news broke within hours. Local stations picked it up first, then the nationals. By evening, it was everywhere. Alabama cold case solved after 45 years arrest. Made in 1979 disappearance. Man charged with murder of mother and 2 infants. Decades-long mystery finally cracked. The story spread fast. People who'd never heard of Rebecca James suddenly knew her name, knew her daughters' names, knew the face of the man accused of taking them. Teresa watched the coverage from her living room, Miguel sitting beside her. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She just stared at the screen as they showed Pritchard being led into the courthouse, his hands cuffed, his head down. "That's him," she said quietly. Miguel nodded. "That's him. He's been here the whole time." "I know, Mama." She turned to look at her son, and for the first time in decades, her face wasn't weighed down by uncertainty. It was weighed down by something else. Rage. "He's been here," she said again, her voice shaking. "Living his life. While my baby, while those girls." Miguel took her hand. "He's not getting away with it. Not anymore." Teresa looked back at the screen, at the man who'd stolen everything from her. "No," she whispered. "He's not." The investigation moved quickly after the arrest. Detectives executed a search warrant on Pritchard's trailer. What they found inside made even the most seasoned officers go quiet. A storage box tucked beneath the bed. Inside, photographs, personal items, things that didn't belong to him. A child's stuffed rabbit, a woman's bracelet, a faded driver's license with Rebecca James's face on it. They also found a journal, handwritten, disjointed, filled with ramblings that read like confessions wrapped in justifications. One entry, dated August 1979, 2 months after Rebecca disappeared, read, "People don't understand. They think it's about cruelty. It's not. It's about control, about knowing you're the last person they see, the last voice they hear. That's power. That's everything." The forensic team also recovered DNA evidence that matched samples taken from remains found years earlier in a remote wooded area east of Montgomery. Remains that had been unidentified. Until now, Rebecca, Anna, Alyssa, they'd been there all along, hidden, forgotten, but not anymore. The prosecution moved forward with the case. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, physical items, the journal, witness testimony from a man who'd worked with Pritchard in the late 72nds and had stayed silent out of fear for decades. His name was Carl Dempsey. He was in his 70s now, living in a nursing home in Georgia. When detectives tracked him down, he broke down before they even finished asking the question. "I knew," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I knew something was wrong. He came back one night in 79, acting strange. His hands were shaking. He had dirt all over him. I asked him what happened, and he just looked at me and said, 'You didn't see anything.' So I didn't say a word." "Why not?" one of the detectives asked. Carl's voice cracked. "Because I was scared. He wasn't right. You could see it in his eyes. I thought if I said something I'd be next. And now? Now I'm old, and I'm tired of carrying it." He looked up at them, his face hollow. "I should have said something. I should have stopped him. But he didn't. And 3 people died because of it." The trial began in late summer of 2024. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back rows. Victim advocates sat with the family. Teresa was in the front, Miguel beside her, both of them dressed in black. Leonard Pritchard sat at the defense table, his face blank, his hands folded. He didn't look at the family, didn't look at the photos. The prosecution displayed photos of Rebecca, of Anna, of Alyssa. He just stared straight ahead, as if none of it had anything to do with him. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Diane Ruiz, laid out the case methodically. She walked the jury through the timeline, the disappearance, the search, the decades of silence. Then she showed them the evidence, the DNA match, the journal entries, the items found in his trailer. She called Carl Dempsey to the stand. He testified, his voice shaking, about what he saw that night in 1979. She called Dr. Marissa Tran, the genealogist, who explained how they'd traced the DNA back to Pritchard. She called Detective Cole, who walked the jury through the investigation, the years of dead ends, the pattern of disappearances, the moment they finally found the connection. And then she called Miguel. He walked to the stand slowly, his hands clenched at his sides. He was sworn in, and then Diane asked him to tell the jury about his sister. Miguel's voice was steady at first. He talked about Rebecca, how she loved her daughters, how she worked hard, how she always smiled even when things were tough. But then Diane asked him what it was like when she disappeared, and his voice broke. "It was like the world stopped," he said. "Like everything just froze. And we've been frozen ever since, waiting, hoping. My mother kept the porch light on for 45 years. 45 years, because she believed they'd come home." He looked at Pritchard for the first time. "And you knew. You knew where they were the whole time, and you said nothing." Pritchard didn't react, didn't blink. Miguel's hands shook. "I hope you rot." The defense tried to argue reasonable doubt, tried to suggest the evidence was circumstantial, tried to paint Pritchard as a man who'd made mistakes but wasn't a killer. But the jury didn't buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned with a verdict. Guilty, on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Teresa closed her eyes and let out a breath she'd been holding for 45 years. Miguel put his arm around her. "It's over, Mama," he whispered. But Teresa shook her head. "No, it's not over. It's just different now." Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Leonard Pritchard was given 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge, an older man with a stern face and a steady voice, looked down at Pritchard and said, "You took 3 lives. You took a mother from her family. You took 2 infants who never got the chance to grow up. And you did it without remorse, without mercy. This court shows you the same." Pritchard was led out of the courtroom in chains. He still didn't look at the family. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Teresa stood in front of a crowd of reporters. Miguel stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "How do you feel?" one reporter asked. Teresa was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I feel tired, but I also feel like I can finally breathe." "What do you want people to know about your daughter?" Teresa's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed strong. "I want them to know she mattered, that Anna and Alyssa mattered, that they weren't just names in a file. They were real. They were loved. And they're still loved." "What happens now?" Teresa looked up at the sky. "Now we bring them home." 3 weeks later, Rebecca, Anna, and Alyssa James were laid to rest in a cemetery on the outskirts of Montgomery. The funeral was small, just family and a few close friends. Detective Cole was there. So was Dr. Tran. 3 white caskets, side by side. Teresa stood at the graveside, one hand on each of the smaller caskets. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough. Instead, she whispered, "You're home now. You're finally home." Miguel read a passage from the Bible. A pastor said a few words, and then they lowered the caskets into the ground. That night, for the first time in 45 years, Teresa turned off the porch light. She stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the dark bulb. Then she closed the door and went inside. The case was over. The man was in prison. The family had answers. But here's the question I want to leave you with. Does justice plus 45 years equal peace, or does it just equal survival? Because Teresa survived, Miguel survived, but they didn't get Rebecca back. They didn't get to watch Anna and Alyssa grow up. They got the truth. And sometimes, the truth is all you get. Rebecca James was 23 years old when she disappeared. She loved her daughters. She loved her family. She deserved to grow old. She deserved to see her babies take their first steps, say their first words, live their first lives. And Leonard Pritchard took that from her. He took it, and he hid it, and he lived with it for 45 years. But he didn't win. Because her name is still here, her story is still here. And as long as we remember, she's not gone. So, Here's what I need from you. Tell me in the comments, what's a cold case you think deserves this kind of attention? What's a name that shouldn't be forgotten? Drop it below. Let's make sure these stories don't disappear. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, hit that subscribe button. Share this video. Because the more people who hear Rebecca's name, the more her life means something. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for refusing to let the silence win. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and never stop asking questions. Because sometimes, the answers take 45 years, but they're worth the wait.